Matt Schaff and Jared Small of DraftSharks.com here to address some key start or sit decisions for your Week 5 lineups. But Jared, we're going to kick it off with a guy that we know is sitting in Week 5 because he's all over the fantasy news right now. It's Davante Adams, who has requested a trade, said he would prefer to be traded. I don't know exactly what the language is other than he's going through his house and ordering Taco Bell whenever he wants to. He's also sidelined with a hamstring injury. So there's a lot going on here that we kind of have to figure out, deal with, manage somehow in fantasy. Obviously, everybody hears the hamstring injury thing and is like, yeah, hamstring injury, I bet. It's interesting timing, of course, coming out at about the same time as this, report that he wants to be traded from the team. But we kind of have to believe this hamstring thing, I think, in assessing everything. Obviously, the trade we're going to talk about, but I think we have to treat it as though he has a real hamstring injury because it makes more sense to do that and find out that the hamstring is fine than it does to say, nah, the hamstring injury is fake, and then have him miss further time. So are you doing anything with Davante Adams right now?
Just for the hamstring thing, like if you're the Raiders and you're trying to trade this guy, like why would you say he has a hamstring injury? That's not going to help his price. I think it is legit. There was a report recently that the Raiders have told teams that it's like 1 to 2 more weeks for Adams with the hamstring. So I would guess it's probably going to be another 1 to 2 weeks before he gets traded. Adams in most cases is probably a hold with the injury, with the uncertainty of where he's going to be playing next. Like the market for him probably isn't that strong at this point, but I'm not buying Davante Adams right now. He was our 2024 bust pick in part because of the situation in Vegas with the quarterback concerns and the addition of Brock Bowers, but also because Adams looked like a declining player heading into this season. And if you look at what he's done so far, his current Pro Football Focus receiving grade and yards per route run would be his lowest since 2015, his second season in the league. So I don't think he's this elite wide receiver. I think he's still good. I don't think he's an elite wide receiver. Then you look at these potential landing spots, like the 4 teams I've heard most connected to Adams so far: the Jets, the Saints, the Steelers, and the Cowboys. I think the Jets and Cowboys would be okay because they at least have quality quarterbacks, but they also have excellent wide receivers on those teams with Garrett Wilson and CeeDee Lamb. The Saints and Steelers would be a disaster for Adams. Those are 2 of the run heaviest teams in the NFL. Maybe they pass a bit more with Adams, not enough where he's going to be a guy who's, seeing a ton of targets every week. So his value is probably more likely to get dinged at this point than boosted with a move out of Vegas if these are the teams that he's going to end up on. If I had him, I'd hold him, but if I didn't, I would not be buying right now.
I agree with that. I think the only case where I might think about it is if the person in my league who has Adams is like, all right, I'm sick of this guy, I'm taking offers. Right. You throw out something low ball and see just how fed up that person is. If we kind of position him like DeAndre Hopkins last year, where he wound up in low wide receiver 2 territory, I think that's fair. Obviously, we don't know where he's going to land yet, so it's tough to really project. So I'm certainly not actively going after him or trying to sell him if I have him on a roster. Related moves, though, could be interesting. I think Jakobi Meyers, first of all, he's 65% rostered on Sleeper. So, if you're in one of those scattered leagues where Jakobi Meyers is available, I would go ahead and pick him up because he's already shown his value. 19 targets over the past 2 games, finished as wide receiver 26 last year. I think he's even worth considering making a move for. I'm not sure that I would go straight up after Jakobi Meyers because I think that would signal to the person who has him that you're targeting him, expecting Davante Adams to leave. You think there's big upside. And I don't know, for me, if somebody comes after that individual player, I'm like, why exactly do you want this guy? Whereas if you stash Jakobi Meyers in an offer that's 2 for 2, for example, I think it's a little bit easier to sneak that one through.
Yeah, for sure. Myers has always been a pretty strong target earner, even going back to his days with the Patriots. And if Adam does leave town, I think Myers will probably see enough volume to, be like a wide receiver 3 option. The other potential moves I would make here, I would price check Brock Bowers right now. I know he's still sitting high among tight ends in total fantasy points on the season, but he's had 2 straight disappointing games, including, last week in that first game without Davante Adams. But Bowers did set a season high last week in route rate at 81%. He was down at 65 and 56% the previous 2 weeks. That was like becoming a concern. But if he's going to be in that, 80% route range, he's a strong fantasy starting, top 5 fantasy tight end going forward. And maybe you can get him for a bit cheaper than that. Then in deeper leagues, I do think I have some interest in Tre Tucker. Antonio Pierce talked him up multiple times this summer. You watched that game last week against the Browns. They schemed some touches for Tucker, especially early in the game. They gave him that end around that he scored 3-yard touchdown on. So in deeper leagues, I think Tucker could be a a spot start option if Adams is gone.
Yeah, I wouldn't go after Tre Tucker in trade talks right now because he's coming off of 2 good games, but he's available in 70% of sleeper leagues still as of this morning. I certainly think that Tucker is worth stashing in more places than that. So go see if he's available. And then, kind of on the periphery of all of the Davante Adams talk, obviously the biggest rumor is going to be to the Jets. The word is that he would like to go to the Jets. Duh. That's where Aaron Rodgers is. That's where Davante Adams did his best stuff. But the Raiders are apparently going to chase the best offer. So I guess first off, should we worry about Garrett Wilson at all with the Davante Adams rumors or possibility?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if Adams ends up with the Jets, that'd be bad news for Garrett Wilson, who is obviously already underwhelmed so far this season, despite having a 25% target share. And to me, that's like the argument for Wilson going forward is like, talented player with a good quarterback. If he keeps seeing this type of volume, he's going to be fine. He's not going to see a 25% target share if Davante Adams ends up in New York. It would be close, but if you made me bet, I would bet on Adams out targeting Wilson, like once he, settles in with the Jets, maybe after a week or two. That rapport with Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers has struggled connecting with Garrett Wilson so far. And Rodgers is not going to wait around and try to figure this out with Wilson. If they end up getting Adams, I would bet on Adams out targeting Wilson the rest of the way.
Now, there is potential that even just this rumor is further knocking down Garrett Wilson's price in trade. And I mean, there are 31 teams that Davante Adams could go to. So yeah, maybe he lands with the Jets, but the chances of that are relatively low if the person who has Garrett Wilson in your league is like, oh crap, here comes Davante Adams. So worth looking into that. We do have Garrett Wilson as a buy in this week's trade targets article. I mean, if they trade for Davante Adams, I would take him out of that section. But like I said, this is a good time to just see how low that price is. And maybe you can steal Garrett Wilson in that way. You're really not even losing too much, even if Davante Adams lands with them.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even if Adams ends up there, I think Wilson can still give you wide receiver 2 numbers. It'd be, Mike Williams, Allen Lazard, Tyler Conklin, those guys would kind of disappear, I think. But I think Wilson would, still see enough volume to be okay. So I do still like him as a buy right now, especially if the Adams rumors, further lower his price.
Tyler Conklin's got enough ink on him. He's never going to disappear. Away from the Davante Adams talk, we've got DeAndre Swift, who, let's just run through his first 4 weeks of the season so far. 3 PPR points in week 1, 8.2, 6.2, 29.5 on everyone's bench last week, 93 yards and a touchdown rushing, 7 catches for 72 yards against the Rams. Jared, maybe there was some, we believe Swift will get going from coaches last week. I didn't see it. Did you see anything like that?
No, to me, the biggest takeaway here is the Rams defense. Let's start everyone against the Rams defense. We're going to get to them later talking about the Packers. Swift's usage remained nice last week. It had been nice the first 3 weeks. That didn't lead to fantasy points. The thing here is Swift gets Carolina now in week 5. Carolina almost as bad as the Rams. They're 25th in run defense DVOA. They're 29th in our adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back. I would start Swift this week. He sits uncomfortably high in our week 5 running back rankings. I would look to sell him immediately after this game against Carolina because I still don't believe in him or this Bears running game.
Carolina was already bad on defense, and by the way, lost their 2 starting linebackers in last week's game. Shaq Thompson's done for the season. We'll see about Josie Jewell. I don't know exactly his status for week 5 at the moment, but it only got weaker. So yeah, great spot to use Swift this week. We'll see beyond that. I wonder too if DeAndre Swift busting out in week 4 might be a cautionary tale for Mark Andrews managers who are ready to completely quit on him. The similarity is clearly the Bears believed in DeAndre Swift heading into the season. They paid him that money. He has been productive in the past, even though he's been up and down. All fantasy football managers know that. Mark Andrews has been excellent. The Ravens are still talking as though they believe he is a very good player and a key to their offense. And that makes it seem more like we just went through 2 goofy weeks and we've got a Mark Andrews rebound coming. Is that your take on him?
I'm probably lower on Andrews than you are at this point. Swift had the usage all season. Andrews has not had the usage at all. I get the game scripts have been goofy. That's how the Ravens want to win, though, right? If they can have it their way, they want Lamar Jackson throwing it 20 times. There's going to be games this year where the Ravens have to throw it more, and Andrews, I do think, is going to pop up in spots. But, trying to predict when those are going to come is going to be pretty tough, I think.
I wouldn't say go buy Mark Andrews this week, but I would hesitate to drop him for somebody else at tight end on waivers. So we'll see where it goes from here. It'll be interesting. Speaking of running backs, Jared, your top 5 PPR scorers at the position over the past 3 weeks have been Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, Kyron Williams, Jonathan Taylor, and Chuba Hubbard. And that 3-week span includes a meh week too. Over the past 2 weeks, he has gone over 20 PPR points. He's been over 120 total yards with a touchdown in each one. Is Hubbard just an easy starter now, at least until Jonathan Brooks is back?
Yeah, he is. You talked about the actual PPR points. Hubbard's also ninth among running backs in expected PPR points over that span. He's getting awesome usage. He's ninth among running backs in carries over the last 3 weeks. He's sixth in targets over the last 3 weeks. And he's playing well. He's averaging 5.8 yards per carry on the season. He is sixth in PFF rushing grade. So Brooks is going to be back at some point, and that's going to hurt Chuba Hubbard's fantasy value. In most cases, unless I'm totally loaded at running back, I'm just going to hold Hubbard at this point and get this production out of him for I think at least another 2 to 3 weeks here. And you look at the Panthers' upcoming schedule, Chicago this week. The Bears have been really tough against the pass so far this season, but not very good against the run. So it's a fine matchup for Hubbard. Then he gets Atlanta, kind of just a middling run defense. Then he gets Washington, an excellent matchup. So for those 3 weeks alone, and how thin running back can be, like I would just use Hubbard those 3 weeks and then kind of deal with the Brooks thing later.
Agreed. And I would still hang on to Brooks because we have no idea what things are going to look like once he's back or exactly when he's coming back. Obviously, the team liked him enough to take him in round 2. The Raiders' backfield has been one of the more confusing ones so far. The least surprising thing about it is that it's third worst in PPR scoring through 4 weeks, fifth worst in non-PPR, fourth worst in half PPR. And Jared, I think that's a key starting point as opposed to the names of the players or, recent usage, because a lot of times we want to figure out a backfield so that we can know who we're going to get value from. To me, the biggest thing about this Raiders backfield is there's just not a whole lot of value to mine for. So I don't really care that much how they're used. I would rather have nobody.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I mean, fantasy teams might be in trouble and might be needing to use these guys. We can't all be loaded at running back. Most teams aren't loaded at running back. So I think there's a pretty good chance. Like I would bet on Alexander Mattison outscoring Zamir White, at least in PPR the rest of the way. Head coach Antonio Pierce said Monday that Mattison, quote, deserves more reps and he'll get them. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, that's totally true. Mattison is beating Zamir White so far in yards per carry, 5.1 to 3.1. He's beating him in success rate, beating him in yards after contact per attempt. Madison's just been the better runner so far. And I think what makes Mattison a bit more interesting, and I'm definitely with you, he's not an exciting play. He's never going to get beyond like RB3 range in our rankings. But Madison's already been leading in passing game usage and getting the goal line carries for this Raiders team. I know there's not a lot of goal line carries to be had here, but when they do get down there, Madison's been getting that work. So a guy who could lead in carries, targets, and goal line snaps like that, that's worth something. I'm not saying he's going to be a league winner, but he could be useful, especially as we're getting into bye weeks now.
Yeah, I would say he's more interesting than Zamir White. And, I'm not coach speak index. I don't know exactly how reliable Antonio Pierce is, but it seems like we can take him at his word in what he has told us so far. Like late last year, he told us he wanted to establish the run, and we got lots of Zamir White running over those final 4 weeks of last season. So I have to believe him that Madison's going to get to work. He's been getting work, like you said, all year, especially in the passing game. I would bet on him over Zamir White, and I would love to not have to rely on either one. A different backfield with similarly split usage, but some actual value to help our teams potentially are the Bengals. They rank 9th in running back scoring across formats. Zack Moss sits 18th in PPR points. Chase Brown 31st, but it's Brown coming off an RB6 finish in week 4. And there was more to that game than just better luck for Chase Brown on touchdowns, right?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, they split carries right down the middle. Both guys got 48% of the team's carries. And then you mentioned Chase Brown's 2 touchdowns. Those both came from inside the 5-yard line. Brown got 2 of the 3 Bengals carries inside the 5. He had 0 carries inside the 5. They had all gone to Zack Moss prior to last week. So there was definitely a change in roles last week. Chase Brown definitely has shortcomings as a player, but he is explosive. Like every time he gets any space on a carry, he looks explosive. He usually breaks off a big gain. So we'll see how it evolves. To me, Moss is still the better week 5 play. He did still outsnap Chase Brown last week. He still easily ran more pass routes. He did out target Chase Brown as well, but like they're definitely getting closer. And I think, as you said, man, this is a valuable backfield. So I think there's a pretty good chance that Moss and Brown are like weekly fantasy starters for us the rest of the way.
The other thing is we've only got 4 games so far. 2 of them have been pretty even splits between these guys, and 2 of them have weighed heavily in Zack Moss's favor. So it's possible that the Bengals coaches see something about that matchup and say, this is a Zack Moss game. This is a both of them game. So we're going to have to keep watching that to see what happens. It is a valuable backfield. It is an offense that really probably still has more upside than what it's showed us the past 2 weeks even. It's gotten better, but we've seen the Bengals be truly good on offense before. And now that everybody's healthy and they get more time, it should get better. So I think both guys should carry value going forward. I agree. You still have to lean toward Moss between them if you're making that decision, at least until something changes further on the playing time front. One other note that I think is interesting in figuring out how they're going to use these two is that the Bengals have not decreased Chase Brown's special teams role. He actually saw a season high in both snap total and snap share on special teams in week 4. And it's not just because he is a return guy for them. He's also on the kick coverage team. He's on the punt coverage team. So I'm not saying that that means they devalue Chase Brown, but that's not somewhere that you put somebody that you think is about to become your RB1. I'll be watching to see if anything changes on that front, because maybe if they do pull him off of some of those special team snaps, maybe that could indicate that they see a bigger offensive role coming.
Kyren Williams got pulled off punt return duty, and we know he's been doing. So yeah, I think that's a good point. I think Brown probably can't become like the feature back if he's still going to be doing that special team stuff.
I sure wouldn't put my starting running back out there covering punts. Unlike the Bengals backfield, you know what you're getting from us every week. We got tips for working your waiver wire. We've got actionable advice for your lineup, the trade market, general team management. If you like it, hit the subscribe button or follow. You'll know when new stuff drops. We'll know that you like what we're doing. We appreciate your support. At least I do. Jared doesn't really care about it, but I appreciate your support. Another backfield, Jared, that's less split, but has gotten a little more muddied, starts with Travis Etienne. We listed him as a sell in our week 4 trade targets article. He wasn't coming off a big game at that point, but he was coming off 3 straight solid outings, 12.5 PPR points or more in each of the first 3 weeks, 85 total yards in the week 3 loss to the Bills. Now, though, we just watched Tank Bigsby outrush Travis Etienne for the second time in 4 games. We saw Etienne leave for a little bit in that game with a shoulder injury that limited him in Wednesday's practice. So this is probably not a good week to try to sell Etienne. Are you using him in your week 5 lineup?
Yeah, probably. I mean, he's still in RB2 range in our rankings, at least in full PPR. He definitely has more value in full PPR. As we talked about on the waiver show on Tuesday, Etienne basically missed the entire first quarter last week. Over the final 3 quarters, he still out-carried Tank Bigsby 10-4, out-targeted him 2-0. So the flipping hasn't happened yet in this backfield. It might happen as soon as this week. What I think keeps Etienne afloat is the passing game usage. He is 12th among all running backs in targets right now. I don't think Tank Bigsby is going to take much of that. That at least keeps Etienne a decent fantasy play. He also has a good matchup this week against the Colts. The Colts are 26th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs.
And I don't think Bigsby is going to overtake him. I think they're just looking to split the backfield, as Doug Peterson has said. He said it last year. He said it again this offseason. They want to have Travis Etienne carry the ball less. And I think based on what we've seen so far, Travis Etienne's probably better off when he carries the ball less. He should be okay if you do need to use him this week against the Colts. It is a positive matchup. So it's not going to feel comfortable starting Etienne, but I think it should work out fine. He is, though, a player that I will keep looking for trade opportunities on. If he goes out and happens to punch in 2 touchdowns against the Colts this week, I'm hitting the trade desk very hard next week.
Yep, I agree.
The Packers got more interesting with Jordan Love back last week, but Josh Jacobs, who has already appeared in our trade targets article twice, once as a hold, once as a buy, was not especially involved. 9 carries, 51 yards on, like I said, an otherwise big offensive day. Jared, should I be worried about that outing for Josh Jacobs?
Yeah, I think you should be a little worried because this Emmanuel Wilson thing seems real. Wilson played pretty big roles in weeks 2 and 3, which I honestly chalked up to just it being Malik Willis games, and the Packers knew they were going to run a lot, and they didn't want to, give Jacobs too big a workload. He obviously got the massive workload in week 2 that was basically cut in half in week 3. But then even last week with Jordan Love back, Emmanuel Wilson set a new season high in carry share. And you go back and look at Matt LaFleur's history. He's always had a committee backfield, and Emmanuel Wilson is playing well enough to maintain a role. So Jacobs is not, I don't think, going to be like the workhorse back you might have thought you were getting. Even after week 1, it looked like he might. I think he can still be a really solid RB2. Even over the last 2 weeks with Wilson playing a lot, Jacobs is 20th among running backs in expected fantasy points. He's 41st in actual fantasy points. So there's some positive regression coming here. I think it's going to come this week. We talked about this Rams defense against the run. They're 31st in run defense DVOA. They're 19th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. Packers haven't have the second highest implied total this week at 26 points. So I think this is the week that Josh Jacobs gets going. I think he finds the end zone this week. I like him as a start going forward. Again, I think he's like more of a mid-range RB2.
Matt LaFleur has been splitting backfield since he had Dion Lewis and Derrick Henry together in Tennessee before arriving in Green Bay. So he likes having split backfields. It's just that Emmanuel Wilson is what we thought Marshawn Lloyd might be right now. It's something to be aware of for Josh Jacobs. I wouldn't go to the level of worrying because we saw Aaron Jones do plenty of producing in split backfields for Green Bay. And like you said, we got very good matchups for Josh Jacobs the next 2 weeks. So not only am I starting him if he's on my team, I'm considering looking at him on the trade desk if I need running back help, because one of the things that's been holding back Jacobs' scoring so far is 0 touchdowns through 4 games. He's had plenty of touches to do things on, but hasn't found the end zone. Elsewhere on that Packers offense, though, the passing game is really what got the lift. Obviously, with Jordan Love back, we're not going to get 50 plus pass attempts in most cases, but he does breathe life into the wide receivers. We've got Jaden Reed very high in our week 5 rankings, and we've got Dontayvion Wicks on the field this week. Jared, how much should we expect out of him?
I think Dontayvion Wicks and Romeo Doubs are both like nice wide receiver 3 plays this week. Doubs has already been a full-time player in this passing game, so he's not going to really get the playing time boost, but he should get a target boost without Christian Watson in the mix. And then Dontayvion Wicks is the guy who's going to get the big playing time boost. And again, this matchup against the Rams are also 31st in pass defense DVOA. They're 21st in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. Talked about the big implied total. I'm trying to start as many Packers as I can this week. I think it really should be a big game for the offense.
I think Jordan Love brings back possibilities for all of these guys to score. I think we can get 2 fantasy viable Packers wide receivers in this game. And I think all 3 of those guys, as you mentioned, are worth considering starting at varying levels in varying league sizes. We know that touchdowns can go anywhere. We know that Romeo Doubs has scored more of them than fantasy managers would like for him to do. And there's nothing scary about this Rams matchup for any of the pass catchers.
Exactly.
Finally, if you drafted Patrick Mahomes, you probably took him as the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th quarterback off the board. But Jared, here we are in week 5. We've got 4 teams on bye, and yet Mahomes is sitting 12th in our rankings for week 5. Let's start with what's wrong with him that puts him in that position, and then maybe talk about some of the guys that we never would have predicted we would be starting ahead of Patrick Mahomes in week 5. What's wrong with Mahomes? Why is he only QB 12?
Nothing's wrong with Mahomes, and I think that's why he sits quarterback 12, which is generous based on what he's done so far this year. And then you talk about Rashee Rice not being in the mix anymore, or at least for this week, likely a lot longer. I mean, Mahomes right now is sitting 16th among quarterbacks in total fantasy points. He hasn't finished a single week better than quarterback 14 this season. So again, we have him ranked higher than he's even finished this year, and that's because he's Patrick Mahomes. Like, you have to give some respect to the fact that he might be the most talented quarterback in the NFL, and he could just get something done despite all the issues around him. But yeah, I mean, no Rashee Rice. The Chiefs are basically back to where they were last year in terms of pass catchers, plus Xavier Worthy, who has kind of gotten off to a slow start. And then it's a tough matchup for Mahomes too. The Saints are 3rd in both pass defense DVOA and adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to see that and they're going to be like, Patrick Mahomes, how do you have that guy over him? How do you have this guy over him? But you can't ignore the way the scoring's going and the way the production's going. Past 3 weeks, Mahomes hasn't reached 250 yards passing. He's got 6 touchdown passes versus 5 interceptions. And you mentioned the injuries. I mean, lost Rashee Rice, has been without Hollywood Brown all season. So it's not an awesome offense to be in right now. And really, QB 12 is a credit to the upside that the quarterback still has. So with all of that out of the way, the guys that sit ahead of him in the rankings, I'm not going to name all of them because there's some obvious names, but Jaden Daniels, I think, is an obvious name at this point. You're not surprised to see Jaden Daniels ahead of Patrick Mahomes after the way he has started this season. I think Geno Smith is getting to that point. There might still be some doubters, but he's been excellent. Seattle's been throwing the ball a lot. He's got lots of talent at wide receiver, so he's somebody that I'm comfortably starting over most other quarterbacks at this point. Brock Purdy is high in our rankings. He's got a good matchup and obviously good surroundings this week. Who else you got?
Purdy and Geno Smith are like easy starts for me over Patrick Mahomes. I think Jordan Love is an easy start for me over Patrick Mahomes. I would start Justin Fields over Patrick Mahomes. Fields has been quarterback 12 and quarterback 1 over the last 2 weeks. We're kind of being reminded of what his rushing upside can mean. You start to get into like Baker Mayfield tonight on Thursday night. I think that's a close one. Baker has easily outproduced Patrick Mahomes in fantasy so far. Fine matchup against the Falcons. Baker sits ahead of Mahomes in our rankings right now. I think that's the spot where I'd start to debate whether Mahomes or Baker is a better option.
Yeah, that's the toughest click out of all the guys we mentioned, which is why he's just ahead of Mahomes. But he is also projected projected ahead of him. I will have Baker Mayfield ahead in my rankings for the week. I think it's a personal decision at that point between these guys who you want to trust, and I can certainly understand if you want to take Mahomes. If you're wondering who to specifically stick into your lineup, then make sure you check your team intel page. It is not working on general scoring principles like we are in this show. It's not assuming anything about your league because it knows your exact scoring system. It knows who you have on your roster. It has our projections right in there, tailoring them to your situation. It's as clear a set of start sit recommendations as you're going to find anywhere. And if you still have not gotten the insider information that includes the team intel page, click the link below in the show notes. Get on board for the rest of the season before it's too late. We want to be your unfair advantage.